Good afternoon, everyone. If you're in the East Coast time, good morning if you're further west, and good evening if you're joining us from Europe or the UK. Welcome to our discussion. My name is Andy Russell. I'm a co-director of the Maintainers. In my spare time, I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at SUNY Polytechnic Institute here in sunny Utica, New York. Our subject today is the gig economy as seen through the lens of maintenance. Gig workers, including shoppers, drivers, and freelancers of all kinds, make fundamental contributions to global society. They maintain us. Some even have been recognized during the COVID pandemic as essential workers, that quotes essential workers. In light of their contributions, we should ask, how do companies, governments, and individuals maintain gig workers? Or in other words, how do they and we all ensure that this form of labor does not devolve into pure exploitation? Our discussion today is organized by two groups. In fact, it's our first collaborative undertaking, and we're really excited to be working together. The group that I'm representing is called the Maintainers, as I said. We're a global research network interested in the concepts of maintenance, infrastructure, repair, and the myriad forms of labor and expertise that sustain our human-built world. I'm a co-director of the Maintainers along with Lee Vinsel and Jessica Meyerson, and Lee and Jessica will be guiding us through later portions of this event. And now I'll turn it over to Naomi Turner from our friends from the Festival of Maintenance. Naomi.
Hello, thanks for that really good, that great intro, Andy. So yeah, we're really excited to be here. I'm here from the Festival of Maintenance. We're a UK-based event. We've been running a couple of years now. We were due to have our third big festival this year, but unsurprisingly, we're going to go online, I think. So our aim is to celebrate and kind of like really recognise people who maintain different parts of our world and how they do it. For us, that means actively recognising the often hidden work done in repair, custodianship, stewardship, tending and caring for the things that matter. We're really excited to be collaborating with the Maintainers. It's something we wanted to do for a while, but now that geography has no meaning, this is something that's like suddenly become possible, and really kind of work together to think about like the things that we are interested in. And like what that really means in the present moment, possibly kind of like, things have a new relevance, I think. So we're really excited to be here today.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started and introduce our speakers. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. We'll bring them up during the presentation. And we'll have time for questions at the end. Also, if you're not a guest speaker, we please ask that you mute yourself and turn off your webcam so we can preserve the quality of the recording. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who will introduce our first speaker, Katie Wells.
Hi, I'm Lee. As Andy said, I'm one of the co-directors of the Maintainers, and I'm going to introduce Katie Wells, one of our speakers. Katie is a postdoctoral research fellow at Georgetown University's Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor. She writes about the changing relationship between cities, technology, and work. She's published findings on smart cities, housing policies, and Washington, D.C. history in academic journals, such as Environment and Planning D, Society and Space, and Urban Geography. And she's discussed the real-time impacts of her research in media outlets such as the Washington Post, the National Public Radio, ABC National News, CityLab, and the San Francisco Chronicle, among others. Now I'm going to hand it over to Naomi once more to introduce our other speaker.
Thanks, Lee. Niels van Doorn is an assistant professor in new media and digital culture at the University of Amsterdam. He's also the principal investigator of the Platform Labour Research Project. This runs till 2023. It's funded by the European Research Council. Niels' research examines how digital platforms are transforming labour, social reproduction, and urban governance in what he terms post-welfare societies. And we're going to kick off today with Katie Wells. Katie, over to you.
Okay, great. Hi, guys. Thanks to Andy and Naomi for inviting me to share this work. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Hopefully this will work, guys. As Lee said, I'm a postdoc at Georgetown's Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor. And the findings that I want to briefly share with you today are from an ongoing study about what platforms mean for the way cities are being organized, lived in, built. This is work that I'm conducting with Kafui Atto at the City University of New York and Declan Cullen at George Washington University here in DC. Can you guys see the share?
Yeah.
It looks great.
I'm a professional, clearly. Okay, my point here is going to be a simple one. Platforms are becoming new institutional actors and changing the shape of urban governance, especially in cities like Washington, DC. For those of us with concern with the working class, or as Andy and Lee might say, the maintainers, or the pandemic, rebranded version of this called essential workers, there are significant implications afoot for what's been happening. We'll start, oops. Oh wait, so how do I change slides?
Katie, it looks like, are you already using your arrow button or pressing enter? How would you typically do it?
Yeah, I was just using my arrow. Let me stop the share. Sorry, guys.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, this happens. Everyone knows this. If it doesn't happen on every call, it's more of a surprise than when it does.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right.
No, you might have just not had it selected. It might have been a screen issue. So just try it again. You're good.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you the story if not, if you can't see the pictures. Okay. Can you see it now a bit?
Yeah, just present and then hit the present button and you're good.
Oh, but you know what? It's not actually letting me move through it.
Okay. You can also just select the slides and we'll see everything, but it'll work. There you go.
All right, friends. Okay. This is Ron. Okay, we're going to start with Ron on January 13, 2012 in Washington, D.C. That day, Ron Linton ordered an Uber from his smartphone. At the time, Uber was operating in only 6 U.S. cities. Ron was frustrated that the city government in D.C., the D.C. Council, the Office of the Attorney General, and the mayor had yet to confront Uber about whether it was evading the law. So Ron tried to take matters into his own hands. He was, after all, the city's chairman of the taxi commission. At the end of that Uber ride at a hotel in downtown DC, taxi enforcement officials were waiting. They issued a $1,600 fine to the driver of his Uber ride and impounded the vehicle. Ron had set up and starred in his own sting operation. Almost immediately, public debate in DC emerged. What should the city do about this thing called Uber? 3 answers emerged too. 1, change the law to accommodate Uber. 2, change Uber to accommodate the law. And 3, whatever is done, make sure the city does not appear anti-tech. A young Google retiree with a local blog exemplified the first position. In a letter to the editor of the Washington Post, the blogger said that if the city finds Uber to be illegal, then, quote, something is wrong with the law, not with Uber, end quote. Ron, the taxi commissioner, fit the second category. He wanted Uber to agree to licenses, inspections, and other requirements that were already in place for taxis. Regulations, he said, quote, make sense out of chaos, end quote. For 5 high-ranking city officials who participated in this study, the issue was less how to regulate Uber and more whether regulation would make the DC mayor, who was very much, quote, trying to grow the tech sector, appear to be, quote, anti-innovation. Ron's sting operation was embarrassing and, according to one official, quote, a silly PR stunt. The sting operation was also highly ineffective. Okay, you guys see that one? Later that year, DC officials awarded Uber its own business category, exempted it from existing taxi regulations and taxi commission oversight, and eliminated 3 possibilities: a ban on surge pricing, a requirement that 10% of the fleet would be wheelchair accessible, and a price floor to protect workers. As the Washington Post put it, the law would have, quote, little practical effect on Uber's actual operations in the city. But the end of Ron's struggle in 2012 to regulate Uber was by no means the end of the city's larger problem. When Uber rolled out UberX in 2013, Ron did not stage another sting operation, but he did try to single-handedly take on the Silicon Valley beast again. Within a week of UberX's rollout, Ron adopted new regulations at the Taxi Commission to outright ban the service. Like clockwork, the DC Council came to Uber's rescue and used emergency legislation to immediately block Ron's efforts. Uber, not deterred, also got to work. In the first 6 months of 2014, Uber spent $300,000 to lobby the DC Council, arranged 18 meetings with individual council members and staffers, Senate's then infamous CEO to twice testify at City Hall, and coordinated 5,000 customer emails to be sent to the DC Council. The council staffer most responsible for drafting the Uber legislation said, quote, "I probably had either a meeting, at least one phone call, or at least one email, probably every day in the 3 months leading up to the vote on the UberX issue." The eventual 2014 law on UberX was a wholesale coup for the company. The 2014 law eliminated the Taxi Commission altogether, created a new department with the power only to sanction and fine platform companies. The new department could not access any data, right? Here's the story, this is a data company, and yet the new department could not access any data about how many vehicles were on the road, how many customers were using the service, how many rides were taking place, how many registered drivers were operating on the platforms. Even the most basic information on the operation of Uber became virtually impossible for policymakers, journalists, or researchers like myself to get. But the nail in the coffin was this. The DC legislation made data about ride-hailing immune from the Federal Freedom of Information Act. In the summer of 2016, my colleagues and I sat down with a young man named Zach, who is a lobbyist for Uber. I asked him about how DC ended up with a set of laws that were, in his words, quote, "the most welcoming and the most friendly in the country." He said, quote, "So DC, they adopted our view of the world, I think, and that's why it's one of the best models for us." When I probed him on what that worldview was, he said it was one in which Uber would, quote, "set the standards." He went on, quote, "We can do all the functions that a regulator would, but we can do it at the pace of business," end quote. A former senior mayor staffer described how this power grab unfolded. He said, quote, "Uber wanted to run this thing and then assure us that all their drivers were protected, and it was a kind of a trust us attitude." This former mayoral staffer went on. He said, quote, "I remember being on a few panels where I had to sort of remind people about why we have these regulatory systems to begin with, right? They're for health and safety and worker protection and consumer protection and all these things. You have all these tech people who are saying, quote, 'let's throw it all out.' And you have people like me saying, 'really?'" Over the next few years, Uber and DC officials created promotional videos, held ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and collaborated on transit plans. But in 2018, this long-time cozy relationship showed signs of wear and tear. That year, the DC Council put a provision in its budget to tax ride-hailing as a way to increase financial resources for the city's subway system. The DC Council also quietly slipped in an amendment that would give the public officials basic, though not real-time data on where, when, and how many trips were conducted in the city. This data sharing agreement was certainly a direct challenge to the self-governing arrangement that had made DC a model for Uber for so long. But the arrival of the coronavirus has made DC's inroads on data sharing seem cute, if not trivial. Access to archival data on Uber's operations has not compelled the company to pay its workers a minimum wage, offer workers compensation, provide PPE at no cost to workers, address persistent misclassification, or contribute a single cent to the city's unemployment insurance compensation fund. In the words of one of the drivers in our study, the pandemic adds another layer to the feeling of being inadequate that happens when you take a job because you have no other choice, end quote. This is a picture from another one of our drivers' cars. This is what he calls a hasty partition.
Katie, just to flag that we've got about a minute left.
Okay, great. Platforms are not propelling the idea that essential workers deserve applause. Platforms are propelling the idea that essential workers rather deserve applause, but not decent pay, safe workplaces, or a host of other fundamental labor protections. Earlier this month, DC officials adopted a temporary cap on the commission that delivery platforms could charge. The city flexed their regulatory muscles, but took no action to protect the commission that platforms take from individual workers. So the question that must be posed is this: will this city, which has allowed a platform company to become a new institutional actor, shift gears? Or will it continue to let Uber shape how governance gets done, which publics are prioritized, and who survives the pandemic? Will it protect the actual maintainers of life, the essential workers, or just the essential services? My final point is this, if that's okay. I do not find it surprising that Uber's priorities have thus far won out in DC, but how it has won out should be of interest to all of us who are working toward radically different futures. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. That was terrific. Niels, we're going to hand it over to you.
All right, then I'm unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Niels van Doorn, coming at you live from Amsterdam. Let me see. Well, before I share my screen to show you some slides, I hope those work. I think I want to just kind of contextualize what I'm going to say, hopefully within 10 minutes that are allotted to me. I just wanted to reiterate or repeat what was said before. The question was, how do we, and then the question can also be posed, who is we exactly, maintain gig workers? Right, that's kind of a central question for this webinar or meeting. And so for me, that question can be rephrased as, who will be held responsible for this maintenance? And it's clear to me, and has also been just shown beautifully by Katie, that platforms are not taking that responsibility. Not even close. So the question then that I want to address is who will? And while I will start basically very small or close to my own research, I will then quickly kind of zoom out and basically, as you, I think in English say, throw the gauntlet. and it's going to be quite a big gauntlet, and which contains some suggestions on where I think we need to go, because I think from what we've seen from Katie's case study so very well, is that Uber is that it's not enough to have incremental change from the bottom up. That is definitely a very important element, but I believe that more is needed, because Uber and other companies like Amazon, Deliveroo, Handy simply have too much power, and that power is fueled by finance capital, and that's something I want to address today. But now I want to first share my screen and see if that. So you guys see my screen? Can somebody just briefly tell me?
Sure do.
Yeah. All right, great. And then I'm going to see, yeah, okay, my slides work in this way. Okay, so briefly again, so I'm the principal investigator of the Platform Labor Project running from 2018 to 23. I have my own research project that I've been doing. It's a cross-national comparative study, by the way, comparing gig economy and sharing economies in Amsterdam, Berlin, and New York City. I've been doing ethnographic field work in all these three cities for 8 months each, and so are my PhD students. So my own project within the larger project that I lead is on low-income service work in the on-demand economy. That's what we'll be talking about today, gig economy. And then my PhDs one is focusing on the urban opportunities and challenges of Airbnb. The other PhD is looking at so-called post-welfare platforms. And then we'll soon have a postdoc joining us that looks more explicitly at the policy and legal issues of digital platforms. So if you're interested in this, you want to know more, please visit the site platformlabor.net. First of all, one of the things I've learned over the past 2 years is that gig work is migrant work, by and large. Gig work in all those, especially in large cities, is migrant and minority work. And that can explain also why so many gig workers who are migrants and minorities keep working these jobs, keep doing delivery work, trying to keep cleaning, although the cleaning industry, just like the ride-hailing industry, has completely collapsed. And it's been devastating to see people that I've been very much involved with in my research, and that I've interviewed, that I've kept in touch with, completely lose large chunks or everything of their income, and having to grasp at straws for alternatives, or turn to delivery work where there is still at least an opportunity to make some money. So why are they still continuing to do this work during a pandemic? Is because the alternatives are often much worse. I've seen it first in the US, but also now here in Holland. There's been many reports of meat processing plants where there's COVID rapidly, and those meat processing plants are mostly migrants work there. Same with construction sites, especially ununionized construction work. There's the types of work that migrant workers do are, those workplaces are often even more unsafe than biking around and delivering food. So this is, when I ask the people like, hey, are you still doing this work even though the pandemic is happening? Many say yes, because obviously they have to make money, but also again, because they hardly have any alternatives that are better. And that's something we should also take into account, I think, here. And what I've also noticed is that many gig workers I speak to are more worried about the increased competition. And here I stole one of Katie's slides. Sorry, Katie, just to illustrate it. They're more worried about increased competition, now that so many people are losing their jobs, and then also turn to gig work, to delivery apps, etc., to maybe make some extra money. Then they are worried about COVID-19. When I ask them, like, but does that worry you much? Many say, well, yeah, I just wash my hands, and sure, it worries me, but hey, I gotta make money, and I'm actually more worried that the rates that I'm getting are lower, and that I get less and less orders because so many new people I see around me. So that's kind of the reality that I've noticed, especially here now in Amsterdam, but also when I talked online with people in New York. But this, don't get me wrong here, this definitely doesn't mean that there's nothing the matter with gig work in relation to migrant workers who do it in times of the pandemic. Gig workers as essential, so-called essential workers, that can be sacrificed. So, in one way that you could argue that they are essential, but from the other, in another way, you can also say that they have been rendered essential so they can be forced to continue working, right? So that part, or that sector, is not going to be shut down. So they can be basically sacrificed, and they face the risk of infection every day, as platform companies have been very slow to respond. And also offer marginal support. I mean, you just see here on the slide, they've instituted contact-free delivery, which in some context is quite a joke. Sometimes they throw some PPE at you, some protective gear, but it's very minimal, and it's first come, first serve. So really, they're not taking their responsibility at all. So then the question becomes, who protects gig workers while they serve us and help us maintain a semblance of normal life? So I'm echoing what was said in the introduction. So let me just want to move something. Yeah. So what is to be done? Instead of just talking more about what I found so far, which is not good, what is to be done? That's how I want to end this presentation quickly. Reclassifying workers as employees would be a very important first step. I say, but here I also want to throw down kind of that gauntlet that I was talking about. it won't be sufficient. Namely, I would say that, and I think, and I say this to also have a discussion here, right? So I put this as a provocation to abolish the gig economy, or at least abolish the predatory dynamics of the gig economy. We need to hit platform companies where it hurts. We need to hit them in the pocket. That is, we need to look at tax, at how they do tax evasion, and we have to also look from the level of platforms to the level of what I've been calling meta platforms, which are investment firms like SoftBank. Why are they called meta platforms? Is because they also match, their service is matching platform companies to institutional investors. So that's why they're called a meta platform. And that's where we need to go if we really want to change some of this. It is about increasing private costs, increasing corporate costs. I don't know who, sorry, I don't know who's not moving, but it's really, there's a lot of ching chang chung going on.
Renz, can you mute?
Is that like, oh, that's Ren? Okay, yeah. Sorry, I got a little distracted because of that.
No, it's okay.
So what I'm suggesting, or what my provocation is that we should, instead of these bottom-up incremental changes, pursuing those, which again, they have their value, but there won't be enough. And what we should be looking at are more stringent, internationally coordinated system of corporate taxation and enforcement, especially closing tax loopholes and tax havens. And my country, the Netherlands, is one of the worst offenders. So, start at home. The second is we need to think and talk about increasing capital gains tax on the sale of gig economy related assets by certain firms like SoftBank, because that will make the sale of such assets a lot more costly, which disincentivizes even investing in them in the first place. But even more so, we need to raise barriers to inhibit the investment of public money, so as pension funds, into gig economy platforms, because we should not forget how much public money is now invested in these platforms, which means that if these platforms do poorly, eventually public money and pension funds will also evaporate. And that's a travesty that doesn't get enough attention. Given that these companies are so lost, so not profitable and making such losses and are so predatory, to invest public money is just very unethical, to say the least. So we need to impose barriers there, and we need to impose antitrust style limits on mergers, on takeovers, and also on share concentration, because just one little factoid, SoftBank currently owns about, if I'm correct, about 84% of ride-hailing services globally, which is just an intense amount of power and a scary amount of power they have. And so again, we need to focus on platforms, but also on the meta platforms, the investor class, basically. So because if you increase private costs, you increase public gains. So I think that money gained through taxation predominantly could be used to create publicly owned and operated services. I think that's ultimately the only way to go, because otherwise, if we don't take these steps, companies like Uber will always have enough financial power and leverage, and thereby political clout, because those, with finance capital, you buy political clout, you will always draw the short straw. So we need to do this taxation and then need to come up with public options, publicly owned and operated platform services. And we should strive towards the creation ultimately of digital public utilities. The public utilities notion, I'm following Sabil Rahman's work here, is very important to bring that back. And in order to safeguard sustainable, accessible, equitable platforms for the maintenance of everyday life, in the realms of transportation, delivery, cleaning, etc. And ultimately, what this comes down to, so moving from the technical to say the discursive, the moral, public debate, we need a thorough revaluation, not just of gig workers, but of the public good and the public domain, because that will be central to any post-COVID effort to achieve any type of social justice that includes the plight of many, many vulnerable migrant workers, who currently have so much trouble to maintain themselves. So something's got to give and something's got to go. And I hope to have given an idea, or at least to have provoked the audience here to maybe talk about some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. That was really excellent. And now we're going to head into a moderated discussion period, and I'm going to hand it off to Jessica.
Oh, sorry, stop the share.
Huge thanks to both Katie and Niels for those presentations. Yeah, those were excellent and very generative. I know we're going to take a moment, Naomi and I, who will be moderating this discussion with Niels and Katie, to encourage you all to type your questions into the chat. Jackie, who's part of the Festival of Maintenance team, is going to be watching. I see we have one, so please do continue to post your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll queue them up for Q&A towards the end. So just to kick things off, I'm going to hand over the first question to Naomi.
Hello, thanks so much, Katie and Niels. That was really excellent, and yeah, I learned a lot really just in that short time. So something that I wanted to ask a bit more about is like you both touched on like the amount of political lobbying that platforms do. And you know, like how they sort of you know, win favors with government. And in itself, this isn't a new thing. Obviously companies have done this for a really long time. In the UK, for example, supermarkets have like a very, very powerful lobby because they employ so many people, and they're seen as kind of perhaps not an engine of the economy, but you know, they provide a lot of work to, you know, part-time work, and you know, so they have a lot of political clout. And I still really struggle to see kind of how these like how the Ubers and the Deliveroo's kind of sell themselves to government. I still don't quite understand like why government really want to support this, apart from kind of quite an insidious sort of post-welfare agenda. So I just wondered if you'd be able to answer that. Like, what makes them different?
Katie, or?
No, you go ahead, it's fine.
So then the question is, what makes them different than other lobbyists, right?
Mm.
I think that there are several elements here, several dimensions. One, as Katie also has very well addressed and explicitly addressed, especially in the current situation, up until COVID, I should say, no government wants to be anti-innovation, right? So that is a very, like, discursively already kind of a way they can move and shape discourse. Because if you're anti-big tech or anti these platforms, then you're stifling innovation. So that's one thing, right? But that's only, yeah, that's the one. Then the other thing is, you are also stifling potentially. Look, platform companies are like in many ways like other low-wage, low-road employers and labor market intermediaries. What is their macroeconomical function? They absorb a lot of people who would otherwise be half-employed, partly employed, unemployed, right? That is a very important factor that temporary staffing agencies have as well. So that also puts, that gives platform companies a lot of power. Think, just one brief example, think of Uber losing its license in London. You know what that would have meant. And to 40,000 mostly migrant men would have lost their jobs there in the city. And that was such a big deal that nobody wants that, right? That's social chaos and it's political suicide for politicians. So they weaponize migrant workers, their own workforce, in these senses. And that's really, really disgusting and really dangerous, right? And one last thing, another dimension, what they weaponize as well is data. So I say platform labor is migrant labor, but platform labor is also data labor. And governments have all kinds of trouble, for instance, with logistics, traffic jams, etc. That Uber can say, hey, look at us, we have very useful data that you cannot access. So they leverage their data as an asset, as capital, to get what they want in negotiations, if it gets to that. And what you see over time, that all these platform companies, they've moved from regulatory arbitrage to regulatory entrepreneurship. Those are the institutional actors that Katie just so well has explained. So in that sense, her study is a microcosm. DC is a microcosm, and I think you can reproduce that study in many other cities in similar ways. Okay.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. Yes. that's happening. Yeah, and I would say, here's the thing, Naomi, one of the things that we're struggling with is that question about whether there is anything actually qualitatively or quantitatively different about the lobbying and the corporate capture or the regulatory entrepreneurship that's afoot. And I sort of tossle back and forth, and it's hard, right? Because some days it's like, well, this is just how it always is, that lobbyists always end up writing the laws, right? But on the other hand, we think that there is a shift if we sort of look further back to, moving from just partnering with jurisdictions and entities and lobbying and doing legislative work to actually relinquishing regulatory control altogether. And so this new sort of move, one way we've put it is that as opposed to the city trying to become the entrepreneur, for those of you that are familiar with the work of David Harvey in the 1980s around that point, he was sort of seeing a new way in which cities were competing for footloose capital. We think we're seeing something maybe sort of complementary where instead the entrepreneur is becoming the city. Cities are beset, at least right in the US, but certainly in Sheffield and other places, with deep economic and racial inequalities that make the idea of a private company coming in and saving it so attractive, right?
Yeah, especially in cities, right, that have bad public infrastructures, transportation infrastructures. Yeah, public-private partnerships are then the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to save us, right? And part of the hard thing, and one of the reasons why I think that things haven't shifted much here in DC and in other cities, is that the politicians and the policymakers and the stakeholders don't have the data to tell the story. Look, here's the reality. I'm a qualitative researcher. What we found here very much could be not representative. In fact, I hope it's not. But we have no data to the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of why there might be a stasis around this. Sorry, Niels.
I said same here, exactly. I hear you, yeah. No data. They don't share, they don't want to.
They're a data company, right? I mean, this is
but that's the thing, right? Their data is their strategic leverage, right? That's
right. And likely we are to see, at least that's, we are very likely to see that sort of in the future.
Yeah, and that's why we need to think in terms of, well, maybe all the way up to techniques of expropriation. Yeah. Or at least auditing, right? You can do particular audits, but of course, those things.
And I will say, look, I will say in DC, one of the exciting things happening in the last 2 weeks anyway, is that there was some motivation by labor activists here. And I sent a letter with these labor activists to the city council to say, hey, we should also submit an unpaid tax bill to these platforms. Because if these platforms really are surging with the number of workers that they're hiring, although I think Alex had sort of raised that question, which I was reading in the chat. I think, it's interesting, like there's totally that story, that narrative that there's a flood of people going to these platforms, and that may be the case, but I don't know it. Mm-hmm. So if that is the case, then there's a huge amount of money that we could recoup, like California, New Jersey.
I'm good. I'm glad to hear that those initiatives are being brought to the table, because I was about to say, well, maybe in Europe it's a bit more likely within the EU context, because there has already been quite some pushback against platform companies in general. But I'm glad to hear these.
Oh no, I mean, Niels, they're baby steps. Don't think they're
sure. Yeah. And in my whole, I shouldn't blow my thing, right? Because my whole thing in this presentation was like, to throw the gauntlet and be like, no incremental steps. But I'm actually with you, of course, Katie.
But it's practice, right? It's practice for a better future.
I'm totally with you.
Down SoftBank. We're just not going to do it today.
But for a rhetorical thing.
I will say, Niels and Katie, it's amazing to watch the two of you bounce off of each other. And as Katie just pointed out, we do have some really amazing questions that the participants on the call have put into the chat. So we want to make sure that we get to a few of those, and then y'all can keep elaborating on the research that you found in conjunction with those questions. So moving to the first question. I know, Katie, you brought up Alex's question, so I just want to say we'll try to move through these, and what you might consider is we'll hand it off to each of you as appropriate, given what you've talked about so far, but do feel free to jump in at any point and complement. So Jess Farrell has the first question, and we'll maybe ask Niels to start this one off. So are the suggested tactics for shifting power from platforms back to people in terms of legislation on national or local levels? Are there specific strategies, tactics, toolkits for winning these kinds of reforms? So Niels, you invited us to define who we is. So when you say things like we need to target meta platforms and other recommendations that require significant political will, what are the two of you seeing in your own research? What are you seeing, first off, Niels, in terms of mobilization? Who's being mobilized, who's mobilizing, and where are specific publics getting traction?
Whew, that's a very hard question, because I felt like it was such a big gauntlet to throw, because I don't see that many of those kind of initiatives.
Well, then I'll say something then.
Yeah. The thing is, of course, there's what you see most of is resistance, grassroots resistance, and also policy level resistance, I should say, regulatory level resistance against Amazon. So Amazon is this spot, it's really in the spotlight. So a lot of people are thinking about both on like a level of antitrust, a level of grassroots resistance. This organization in the U.S. called Athena, but there's also Berlin versus Amazon, and there's more local in Europe. There's more of these local branches. I think that those give me most hope, because it's no longer just about workers' rights or about it. It's really tying. It's also about data rights. It's about and moving beyond privacy alone, but really tying the what do you call that in English? Tying all the loose threads together, right? Mm-hmm. and tying workers' rights to the public common good, to data rights, and to kind of really move up the value chain and looking like what's wrong here, and also addressing data valence of impoverished communities, of color, how Amazon works with has services for the police and ICE, etc., etc. So there's these. What I meant to say is, in the gig economy specifically, it's usually only reclassification. That's what's been bothering me a little bit. That it's usually only about workers' rights and reclassification, while I think we should think grander along those Amazon resisting initiatives, because Uber is definitely no Amazon. None of them are, but it has the same aspirations, and it has huge capital influx still. So,
yeah, thank you, Niels. Katie?
Oh, that was a great point. I just had one point to say that in the US, there seem to be hubs coming out of New York City and also LA, the Rideshare Drivers United work. They have been sharing work with other chapters of organizing platform workers. There's an app called Solidarity that they gave to organizers here in DC.
Yeah, and there's a workers info exchange in the UK, in London. They're leveraging the GDPR to do massive amounts of subject access requests, get the data, and then work together with data scientists to use that data to their advantage in court cases.
Fascinating. We'll make sure to everyone on the call that's interested in the 2 or 3 or 4 initiatives that Katie and Niels collectively just mentioned, we'll be sure to find those links and include them in whatever recap we send out. Yeah, we have some additional questions. Let's see, we have one from Adrian. This is there a place for cooperatives to chip away at this? Approaches like, there's an example provided here, Co-op Cycle, which is a federation of cooperatives for delivery style services. So are there particular models, I guess, in terms of worker organization, platform worker organization, that are getting traction?
Okay, me? I don't know. Okay, well then, yeah, I'll answer. I mean, I've been looking into that for quite a while now as well. I've also written about co-ops and the potential of platform co-ops, to be exact. I am a very, very sympathetic negger there. I keep pointing out the potential, but especially also the limitations currently, and to make a potentially long answer short for this, in the context, I would say yes, definitely. I would love to see them thrive, and they are on a very small level are thriving, such as Co-op Cycle, which is basically a federation of platform co-ops. It's not one co-op, so it's already trying to create the same types of scale right? And network effects that, for instance, a Meta platform in the financial industry would be doing as well. It's leveraging, what individual platform co-ops could never do. So there's a lot of sharing going on, a lot of software, like open source software building, etc. So there's a lot of potential here, but this is the thing. The public, again, we need the government. And a lot of my problem with a lot of platform co-op people, problem between, quotation marks, is that it's a very, we'll problem solve our own things, right? Like we will, it's very this common based, kind of skeptical towards the government. So it's in this very strange way, it mimics libertarianism, in which it's this, we solve our own problems. We don't need the government involvement, so because we're skeptical. And I'm not about that. I really think that if there's any way we can have these the commons-based initiatives thrive, we need public subsidization at the very least. And those subsidizations, we have no money at we're heading towards depression currently. But if we would only start taxing properly and legislating that and coordinating that internationally, we would actually have public coffers in which you could create such either fund commons-based ones or create public options. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Niels. Yeah, and Katie, did you have any response to anything that Niels just provided, or would you like to move to the next question? We have so many good audience questions. I know we're gonna run. Okay, let me. So the next one is from Alex. This is for both of you. Alex wondered if you can say more about the availability or actual work for gig workers during COVID-19. So one of the issues with gig workers is that they don't get paid for availability, only for actual rides and or deliveries. However, Uber and other platforms profit from having drivers available during all hours on the app, but do not really compensate drivers for that on-call time. So this is another possible avenue for taxation and regulation. I'm wondering if you've seen this issue in your research and how it's changed, if it did, during the pandemic. Great question.
That's a great question, and it's one that reporters here are trying to figure out, and I think rightly so. I don't know if you guys saw yesterday that Joe Biden voiced support for gig workers and the AB5 regulation coming out of California. So it's certainly something that is getting pickup by mainstream media in a way in which it hasn't over the last 4 or 5 years. And that question that Alex is raising is the one that I keep hearing. And it's one that I don't know the answer to. What we're hearing from our drivers, right, is much of the same, which there have always been days when they didn't make money. Are they losing more money now? It's so hard to say. There certainly are more expenses involved in maintaining themselves, their cars, their vehicles, their bikes. But whether there actually is less work or more work, like, my gut says I don't know. But I think that's a really key question. I think that's a really important question for governing bodies as they think about how essential are these services, who is using them, right? What's a racial breakdown of what areas of my city, right, are really using them, things like that, and who are the workers. So I think it's a question we should keep asking, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief. Which I love that the question was about, not being paid, compensated for availability, right? That you're just riding around dead time, as they call it, right? The one thing that, of course, the one policy initiative, regulatory initiative that has responded exactly to that is the Parrott-Reich study in New York City. Then they initiated a minimum wage based on utilization rate. And that was a very, very slick and smart formula. And in order to force companies to improve their utilization rate, so that the number of, the percentage of time that a driver has a rider in the back in his car, in order to make it more expensive for them to have riders, just being available in dead time. Right? It's much complex to explain, but Parrott-Reich study on utilization rate that was tied to the minimum wage. Now the problem is twofold. Well, actually, it's actually one problem. The problem was there was a lack of enforcement, or still is a lack of enforcement in New York, which led to Uber and Lyft, they just started throwing people off the platform. altogether. So then you are worse off than where you started, right? It's one thing to be,
maybe, I don't know. Are we worse off if we have a predatory workplace that's available? I mean, I don't know.
Well, you're initially worse off if you're thrown off the platform because you have all of a sudden no money at all anymore.
No,
of course, you're right. So for them personally, for the driver, you're worse off initially unless something else happens. And then the problem again is lack of enforcement. And then the last question was about what has COVID changed? Well, with COVID changed, and actually Vice has reported really nicely on this. Vice is doing a great job on reporting a lot of gig economy stuff in the US. That actually now they have seen themselves forced to get these people they threw off and kept throwing off back on the platform. Which is kind of weird because there was less work to go by anyway, right? But in order for not to have them starve, so to speak, they felt that it was okay to to get back from their earlier decision to throw them off and have them on again. But again, have them on being available when there's hardly any rights, because that's the exact issue. So people have been forced to do delivery work or other types of work. So yeah, is much changing? No, we need more bigger changes, enforcement at the very least.
Yeah, thank you both for your response to that question, and Alex for your question. Naomi?
Hi, sorry. We are rapidly running out of time, which is a nice problem to have, but not a problem to have. So we So a question from, I think probably the final question before we maybe shift on to a different platform so we can carry on keeping the conversation going. A question from Jonathan Cooper-Smith is that, so a goal is leveling multiple playing fields, international and local were highlighted. Do the speakers have any thoughts of like the priorities of like the different paths for moving forward in this like new political environment? Do you think things have changed? What are the, like, where are the paths that we can improve the situation?
Do you want to go ahead, Niels?
Well, I hope that we've both kind of address this. I mean, it will be, it sounds really corny, but it will be a mixture of grassroots resistance and organization and that kind of, bottom-up change. But also that has to somehow, raise concerns on the higher levels, like say within the EU, for instance, where I'm located, to also really take notice of this and start changing things. And I just want to remind everyone, or just tell everyone if you don't know, we've come a long way in the EU level, at least, of calling the gig economy collaborative consumption, using that stupid framework from Boltzmann and forgot the book, but. And being super open, and everything is great, and we should just regulate it as an information service, to really in a number of years, like 4 or 5 years, really having severe pushback and having it high on the agenda to curb, to change legislation, to make sure that we implement a social safety net for all workers. These things are quite high on the agenda, and I'm hopefully going to a conference in Brussels in September, where this is like a very high-level European Committee conference, where these things will be, discussed, and hopefully there will be some change. But that is only because the grassroots has always been very, fierce.
Right.
I don't know if that was an answer to the question, though. I didn't get the question entirely.
I think the question was about given and the things that. Trying to sort of ascertain where in this like new sort of political reality, if indeed we are in a political reality, if there is going to be significant infrastructural change, there may not be as a result of COVID, like whether like we can sort of chip away at it a bit more. Katie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are, right? And I think that, Joe Biden coming out yesterday in favor of AB 5, right, changes the game a bit. I mean, that to me feels like a marker, and it may not be anything other than reflecting what's already been afoot. But it was exciting last year when Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders came out. It was exciting when the $17.22 minimum wage passed in New York City. And so I do think that if we look at the history of sort of, if we think about Seattle as a starting point where a little match was lit around Uber organizing, and we sort of can see it spreading, LA, Chicago, Boston, there are all these places where there are events occurring. And it's events that are happening, you know, as I would say, threefold, right? It's happening within state legislatures, it's happening local city boards, but it's also happening in the courts. And so I think that one of the weird things and one of the weird opportunities afforded by the platform economy is that it has been legislated in such a weird piecemeal way, on a state by state, originally city by city, but then eventually state by state basis. And so I think that as a result of that decentralization, there may be opportunities to create some significant cracks, as California and New York have shown.
And I think COVID is the COVID moment, the current moment is really pushing things, right? It's heating things up and it's accelerating things both on the resistance side, but also on the platform corporate side, because platforms are now really eager to show their essential service status, right? And they are looking to become infrastructural and they want to become the maintainers, okay? So this is the big moment.
They can do it better than us, right? I mean,
yeah, no, but so this is the ultimate moment for all of us to ask, who do we want to do our maintenance work? Who do we want to be maintained with? Who do we trust with that huge responsibility for the care, the social reproduction, and the maintenance of us and our loved ones? And I really think that I would put my money, or no, actually, yeah, I would rather put my money on a public option rather than a private option. So yeah, that's really, it's a crucial moment going forward these weeks and months.
Definitely. I think you're completely right about sort of like, you know, like they want to be the maintainers, you know, and, you know, even selfishly, I would love it if like, you know, maintenance became as appealing as data. So, and then we could throw our weight around a bit more. So Lee, do you want to?
Yeah, well, thank you, Katie and Niels, and all of you who joined us today. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you. And you, Katie and Niels, you both did so great. Before we go, we just wanted to let you know that the recording of this virtual roundtable will be posted as soon as possible. We need to make sure there's a good transcript available of it. And because, I mean, the participation certainly exceeded our anticipation, we'll be putting up the questions that are remaining on a Google Doc. We can have some exchanges there. So we'll send it out via the email list and also put it up on Twitter and places like that. We'd ask you to, you know, if you're interested, please visit themaintainers.org and festivalofmaintenance.org.uk for the link, and you can also go to our mailing list and to Twitter, as I said. So we'd like to hear from you. We're thinking about doing some more events, virtual events of this sort. So we'd love to hear ideas, anything you'd like to see addressed in future roundtables. And other than that, I just want to thank Katie and Niels again for doing such an awesome job. And thank you all for showing up. It's been a terrific, fun time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And thank you all for coming.
Okay, wait, can I show you one more thing though, or no?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, we got a minute.
Wait, I forgot to show this picture. We'll see if I can share it. But you guys, there was this gross ad that I cut out of the Times. Okay, can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you can read it, but let me read it to you as our final thought. Okay, to the drivers, delivery people, and restaurants who continue to serve communities across the country, we just want to say thank you. To those who choose not to ride with us right now, thank you for supporting blah, blah, blah. Okay, sounds easy, but we know it's not. While you stay home, we'll help move what matters until that beautiful day when we can all go outside again.
Yes.